Factories never really sleep. Even when the machines go quiet, the walls remember every sound, every scream that got swallowed by the gears, every breath that turned to dust under the fluorescent lights. Working the night shift means trusting the dark corners, the hum of the conveyor, the hiss of the vents, the echo of footsteps that don't always belong to anyone still alive. These are 6 true factory night shift horror stories, told by workers who saw what happens after the lights flicker and the building starts to breathe on its own. If you've ever worked alone at 3 a.m., you already know the sound that low. Steady whine the machines make after everyone else has gone home. That's not the sound of work. That's the sound of something waiting. Story 1. The conveyor that wouldn't stop. Factories are supposed to feel dead after midnight silent, except for the hum of the lights and the soft clatter of machines cooling down. But the line I worked on never really stopped. In 2019, I was working the night shift at a small packaging plant just outside Cleveland. We processed plastic bottles for industrial cleaning products, nothing fancy. Just 10-hour shifts surrounded by the smell of bleach and hot metal. There were only 4 of us on the overnight crewmie, a guy named Rich, a forklift driver named Kendra, and our line supervisor, Jerry, a man who'd worked there so long he could probably run the place blindfolded. Most nights were quiet, just the rhythm of the conveyor belt, the faint rattle of air compressors, and the occasional buzz when the fluorescent lights flickered above us. But one night, the line didn't shut off. We'd finished our quota early and were waiting for maintenance to lock out the conveyor. Jerry hit the switch like always, and the line slowed, then started up again on its own. He frowned. Hit it again. Same thing. Faulty relay, he muttered. Don't worry about it. Just let it run. Except the thing didn't stop running. Not all night. By 3 a.m., the machines were still humming, and the sound had changed. It wasn't a steady mechanical rhythm anymore. It was pulsing, almost like breathing. Rich joked that maybe the factory was alive. We laughed, but the sound didn't stop. Every few minutes, the belt would stutter, like something heavy was dragging across it just out of sight. When Jerry went to check the motor housing, he yelled for me to hit the emergency stop. The button didn't respond. The red light blinked, but the conveyor kept moving. Jerry backed away, his face pale. There's something jammed inside. He reached down to the gap between the rollers. Then he froze. Christ! There was a hand, small, pale, and still gripping a torn piece of plastic wrap. I ran over. It looked too real to be a mannequin, but the skin was gray, like it had been dipped in dust. No blood, no smell. Jerry stumbled back, shaking his head. Call security, he said. Now. I ran to the phone near the wall. Deadline. When I turned around, the conveyor had stopped. The hand was gone. Maintenance arrived 20 minutes later. We told them what we'd seen. They laughed at first until they tried to restart the system. The belt refused to move. Every time they hit the switch, the circuit tripped, and the lights flickered. Kendra swore she heard someone whispering through the ventilation shaft. Turn it back on. We didn't believe her until the power came back by itself. The conveyor whined to life again, rolling smooth and steady, as if nothing had happened. But the plastic bottles moving down the belt now weren't the ones we'd loaded. They were empty, every one of them. And they were sealed. Jerry called the plant manager, who showed up around 4 a.m., angry and half asleep. He made us open one of the bottles. Inside wasn't water or air. It was dust, fine, gray dust. He ordered us to shut the whole line down. But the switch didn't work. Again. This time, even the circuit breaker refused to flip. The entire control panel buzzed like it was alive, every indicator light flashing out of sync. Then the monitors came on. Each one showed a live feed from different parts of the plant hallways, storage rooms, empty loading docks, except in every frame, there was movement. A shadow walking just behind the cameras. The manager ordered everyone out. We grabbed our things and ran for the exit, but as I passed the conveyor, I heard a clink, one of the bottles falling over. I stopped. It rolled slowly to the edge, tapped the floor, and shattered. Inside the dust was something shiny. A name tag. Jerry's. I turned around. He wasn't there. Neither was his jacket or the flashlight he'd been carrying. They searched for him all morning. No trace. No camera footage of him leaving the building. The police did a full sweep, found nothing except the cracked bottle and a single fingerprint on the motor casing. It was his. When the plant reopened a week later, we were moved to different departments. No one was allowed on the night shift for almost a month. But eventually, they brought it back. Corporate pressure, deadlines, money. And on the first night back, the new crew reported something strange. The conveyor started by itself at exactly 3:00 a.m. I don't work there anymore, but one of the guys who still does told me they hear it sometimes, that same hum, the same pulsing sound. And every now and then, one of the empty bottles rolls off the line by itself, taps the floor, and shatters. Always empty, always filled with dust. He said once he picked one up before it broke, held it up to the light. And inside, he swore he could see a handprint on the glass pressing outward. If you ever work the night shift in a factory and the machines keep running after you hit stop, don't go near them. Don't check the rollers. Don't look under the belt. Because sometimes the factory remembers who built it, and sometimes it's still waiting for them to come back to work. Story 2. The Man in the Furnace Room. Factories are supposed to sound alive, clattering pipes, groaning ducts, the steady heartbeat of machinery. But once you've worked there long enough, you learn the difference between a living sound and something pretending to be one. Back in 2017, I worked maintenance at an old textile mill in Gary, Indiana. The building dated back to the 1940s, 5 floors of concrete, dust, and boiler heat that never really went away. The company was barely hanging on, and I was one of 3 night shift techs keeping the place running. Mostly that meant fixing jammed belts, draining condensation from pipes, and resetting the furnaces in the basement when they overheated. We called it the furnace room. None of us liked going down there alone. The place looked like something out of a war bunker, low ceilings, rusted valves, and massive furnaces humming like they were breathing. The air was always thick and dry, and the walls were stained dark with decades of soot. There were 5 furnaces total, each with its own manual reset switch. Every once in a while, the oldest one, Unit 3, would trip for no reason. Our supervisor said it was electrical noise. I wasn't so sure. One night, around 2 a.m., the system alarm started flashing again, Unit 3 offline. I grabbed my flashlight and headed downstairs. The deeper I went, the louder the sound got, a hollow thump, 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 echoing through the pipes like a heartbeat. When I reached the furnace room, I noticed something strange. The main door was open. It was never open. The heat hit me first, wet and suffocating, like breathing through a damp towel. Then I saw footprints in the dust, leading straight toward Unit 3. I called out, "Hello, anyone down here?" No answer. The footprint stopped at the furnace door. It was ajar, just enough to let out a thin stream of heat. I pushed it closed and hit the reset switch. The light flickered green. Then, from behind me, a voice said softly, "It doesn't like that." I spun around. No one there. Just shadows stretching across the walls. I told myself it was the steam pipes expanding, valves hissing, but the voice had been clear, human. I finished the reset and went back upstairs, pretending everything was fine. An hour later, the alarm tripped again. This time, I wasn't alone. Darren, one of the other techs, came with me. We joked on the way down, trying to mask how uneasy we both were. But when we got there, the furnace door was wide open again. The heat pouring out was unbearable, like standing in front of a jet engine. And something was moving inside. Not metal, not fire. Something shifting in the glow. Darren whispered, "You seeing that?" I nodded. We both backed up slowly. Then, from inside the furnace, a shape stepped forward. At first, I thought it was a man, tall, thin, covered in soot. But the longer I looked, the less human it seemed. Its skin shimmered like heat waves, and its eyes reflected the fire without blinking. It spoke, but its mouth didn't move. "You shouldn't close it." The sound came from everywhere inside the vents, through the metal walls, even from under our boots. Darren bolted. I followed. We didn't stop running until we reached the main floor. When we looked back, the alarm light had stopped flashing. We told our supervisor what we'd seen. He didn't believe us. Said it was exhaust hallucination, too much heat, not enough oxygen. He went down there himself. 15 minutes later, the alarms tripped again. But this time, none of us went down to reset it. By morning, the supervisor still hadn't come back. Security went down and found his flashlight lying next to the furnace, its lens cracked, still warm to the touch. They shut down the whole room after that. For a few days, the alarm stopped. Then one night, around 3:13 a.m., I heard it again over the intercom. A low, rhythmic voice crackling through the speaker. "It's too cold." The system wasn't even powered. We disconnected the line earlier that week. The next day, a contractor crew came in to seal off the furnace room for good. They welded the doors shut and rerouted the lines through a new boiler upstairs. But as they worked, one of the welders called me over. He'd found something on the inside of the steel door, writing scratched deep into the metal. It said, "Keep it warm." A month later, I quit. Took a maintenance job at a warehouse across town, but the sound followed me. Every time the heaters kicked on, I'd hear that same rhythm under the hum, a slow, hollow thump, like a heartbeat buried in the pipes. Once, I stayed late to finish paperwork. The lights flickered, and for just a second, I saw a reflection in the office window, a tall, thin figure standing behind me, smoke curling from its shoulders. I turned around, nothing there. But the room smelled faintly of burnt metal. Last month, the old mill finally got demolished. The crew reported finding human bones fused into the walls behind Unit 3. They were never identified. And here's the part no one can explain when they shut off the gas lines. The heat didn't drop. Even with no power, the basement stayed at 120 degrees, still burning. If you ever work a night shift in an old factory and the furnace won't stay off, don't go looking for the problem, because maybe the problem isn't mechanical. Maybe the factory learned to keep itself alive. And maybe it remembers the people who used to feed the fire. Story 3. The security camera on line 4 Factories don't have eyes, but the cameras do, and sometimes they see things you weren't meant to notice. In 2020, I worked as a night security operator at a food processing plant in Michigan. Our entire job was to monitor 64 security cameras from the control room. The building ran 24 hours a day, but during the night shift, only a skeleton crew worked the production lines. Most nights were calm, boring, even just the endless hum of conveyor belts, the occasional forklift drifting through frame, and the blue glow of monitors painting the walls. But one night, around 1:30 camera 4A glitched. It was mounted above line 4, the old sausage packaging area no one used anymore. The feed flickered twice, then stabilized. Except now, the lights in the footage were on. No one had access to that section after midnight. I called maintenance on the radio. No answer, so I zoomed in. There was someone standing at the far end of the line, a man motionless, facing the camera. He wasn't wearing a hard hat or uniform, just a long coat, gray, almost metallic under the light. I switched to another camera angle. He wasn't there. Switched back. He was closer. At first, I thought it was lag. Old cameras sometimes stutter like that. But when I checked the timestamp, the footage was live, real time. I turned on the PA speaker. Line 4 area, identify yourself. No response. The man tilted his head slightly, as if listening. Then the feed cut out. Static. 10 minutes later, camera 4A came back online. The room was empty again. Lights off. I logged the incident, filed it under false motion trigger, and moved on. But around 3A, the motion alarm went off again, same location. Only this time, it wasn't just one camera. Every single feed in the control room flashed the same image for exactly 2 seconds. A still frame of the man from line 4 standing right in front of the security window, staring in. Then everything went black. When the power returned, the system showed a new folder on the desktop. It hadn't been there before. Archive line. I opened it. Inside were hundreds of still images, timestamps going back months, some labeled 3A.M., some 4A.M., all showing the same thing, the line 4 conveyor, with the man standing in different positions. In one image, he was at the far end of the line. In another, he was standing behind the camera, the same angle the camera should have been seeing from. It made no sense. I checked the access logs. No one had been assigned to that section in over a year. The keycards were all deactivated. So how was the power even on? I decided to go down and check it myself. Big mistake. The hallway to line 4 felt colder than the rest of the plant. No fans running, no machines active, but my breath came out in white clouds. When I reached the door, I noticed the lock had been broken, not forced open, but twisted from the inside. I pushed it open. The air inside was heavy, and the lights buzzed weakly overhead. The conveyor sat motionless, everything covered in dust. Except for one thing. The control monitor was on. It shouldn't have had power. The entire section was cut from the grid. On the screen was a single live feed, a camera angle I didn't recognize. It showed the control room, my chair, my desk. Empty. Then the view shifted, panned slowly to the door behind me. I turned around. Nothing there. But the monitor still showed someone standing in that doorway. Tall, still, watching. I ran. When I got back upstairs, the other operator, Ken, was pale. "Where the hell were you?" he asked. "Line 4, I said. "Something's wrong down there." He shook his head. "You didn't hear it." "Hear what?" He pointed to the speaker above the monitors. For a second, I thought it was static again, a faint crackling, like metal scraping against concrete. Then, buried under the noise, a whisper. "We see you." We called the supervisor and shut the system down completely. When I came to inspect it the next morning, they found something strange. The entire Line 4 directory had vanished, not deleted, just gone, like it had never existed. But there was one new file on the control PC. A short video, time-stamped 4:03 a.m. It was recorded from the hallway outside the control room. The footage showed me walking out of the office and down the corridor toward Line 4. Then, a few seconds later, another version of me walked out. No sound, no difference. Just two of me, one a few seconds behind the other, both heading in the same direction. Ken quit that day. I stayed one more week, but every night, the same thing happened. At exactly 3:13 a.m., the camera feeds would freeze, then show a single still frame. Not the man anymore, me. Standing in front of the Line 4 conveyor, motionless, staring at the camera. The timestamp on the footage was always the next day. The plant shut down later that year. They said it was financial losses, but I don't believe that. I think the cameras saw something the company didn't want to explain. A few months ago, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the line said, "We need your access code for Line 4. I told them there was no Line 4 anymore. They paused, then said, "It's active again." Click, call ended. Sometimes at night, I still wake up to the faint buzz of monitors in my dreams. Always the same room, the same angle, the same line of sight. And at the end of the conveyor, I can see someone standing. Sometimes it's the man in the gray coat. Sometimes it's me. If you ever work in a factory with security cameras and one of the feeds flickers after hours, don't check it. Don't zoom in. Don't go down there. Because once the cameras notice you, you become part of the recording. And some footage never stops playing. Story 4. The elevator between floors. Factories are made of patterns, machines repeating, shifts repeating, the same doors, the same noises, the same tired people moving through the same spaces. That's what keeps the work predictable. That's what makes it safe. Until something breaks that rhythm. In 2018, I worked at a distribution center in Pennsylvania. The building was massive, 4 stories tall, with 2 freight elevators that ran day and night. Each one was old enough to creak like a living thing when it moved, and the safety inspector used to joke that they run on prayer, not power. He wasn't wrong. Every week, someone got stuck in one for a few minutes. Power surge, jammed doors, mechanical delay, all routine. Until one night, when the elevator didn't stop at all. I was on the night shift with 2 others, Riley and Tom, both veterans who'd been there for years. We were reorganizing inventory on the top floor, stacking pallets of replacement motor parts when Riley's radio crackled. "Elevator's acting up again," said the control desk. "Stuck between 3 and 4. Tom groaned. "Always between 3 and 4. Why not just fix it?" We laughed, but something about the voice on the radio felt off flat, like an old recording. Riley volunteered to go check it out. He grabbed his flashlight, pressed the call button, and the elevator arrived instantly, doors already half open, like it had been waiting. He stepped in and turned back toward us. "Be right back," he said. The doors closed. The motor hummed. Then silence. 5 minutes later, we hadn't heard from him. No radio response. No movement indicator on the panel. Tom and I looked at each other. "Maybe it's jammed again," he said. He called maintenance. They said both elevators were listed as offline. Neither should have been moving at all. That's when we heard a faint clanging sound coming from the shaft. Slow, rhythmic, like metal scraping against metal. Tom pried open the doors with a crowbar. Empty shaft. No car. We looked down darkness, looked up. The cable was moving, but the sound was coming from below us. We shined the flashlight down, and for a split second, I thought I saw Riley standing on top of the car. His head tilted up toward us, mouth open, as if trying to shout something. Then the light flickered, and he was gone. Maintenance arrived an hour later. They ran diagnostics, claimed the car was sitting safely at level 2 the entire time. When they opened the doors, it was empty. But the control panel was lit, every floor button pressed in, all glowing red. We assumed Riley had walked out on another floor somehow. Maybe he'd lost radio signal, but when we checked the security footage, things got worse. The camera feed showed him stepping into the elevator, turning to face us, and then the doors closed halfway, froze, and the footage looped. Over and over, Riley stepping in, turning, doors closing, then again. It repeated for 4 hours. The timestamp never changed. Tom was pale by morning. He said the whole thing felt wrong. The building felt wrong. When the next shift arrived, they started hearing the elevator moving on its own again. No power signal, no call request, just the sound of gears grinding slowly through the floors. Then the power cut out across the entire plant. When it came back, a new alert flashed on the monitor. Elevator 2, in motion, unknown destination. Security locked the doors, but the movement didn't stop. It kept cycling. Down, up, down again. Finally, around 4A, the system froze completely. The status read, "Door open, floor 3.5. We thought it was a glitch until we opened the shaft again. The car was sitting there, halfway between levels, its doors slightly open. Inside, the lights were flickering. Tom leaned in to look. "Riley," he called. A voice answered, but it didn't sound like Riley. "Come down." I swear the air turned colder instantly. Every sound in the building stopped, even the fans. Tom climbed in halfway before I could stop him. The doors closed on his legs. He screamed. I hit the emergency switch. The system reset. The doors opened. Tom was gone. Only his flashlight was left on the floor, still on, its beam pointing toward the corner of the elevator where something wet was dripping through the cracks. The building went into lockdown. Police, fire department, inspectors, they searched every inch of that elevator shaft. They found nothing. No sign of Riley or Tom. Not even fingerprints. Just one thing written on the wall near the door, in dust and oil. Still between. The plant reopened months later under new management. They sealed off Elevator 2 entirely, turned it into a utility closet. But sometimes, the janitorial staff hears it moving again. No power, no cables connected, just a soft hum, like something traveling endlessly up and down. One worker swore he saw the doors open once when he walked by after midnight. He said it didn't open to another floor. It opened to a hallway that shouldn't exist, gray concrete, fluorescent lights buzzing, stretching endlessly in both directions. He thought he saw someone walking there. 2 figures. One wearing Riley's jacket, the other holding Tom's flashlight. If you ever find yourself alone on a night shift and you hear an elevator moving when it shouldn't be, don't go near it. Don't press the call button. Don't even look when it opens. Because not every floor is meant to be reached, And some elevators don't take you up or down. They take you somewhere between. Story 5. The Screaming Overhead Crane. Every factory has a sound that never goes away. For us, it was the crane. That low, echoing groan of metal grinding against metal, rolling above your head in the dark, like thunder trapped inside the building. We called it the Screamer, at first, as a joke. Later, not so much. In 2015, I worked the night shift at a steel fabrication plant outside Pittsburgh. The place was massive, half a mile long, with cranes that move sheets of metal across the ceiling on thick, rusted rails. There were only 6 of us on nights, and by 2 a.m., everyone worked in silence. No music, no chatter, just the constant creak of steel being lifted and lowered. But one night, the crane started moving by itself. It was a Tuesday, right after lunch break. The shop floor was empty except for me and Carlos, the senior welder. We heard the rail creak overhead slow, deliberate, like someone was manually controlling it. But no one was in the booth. The operator's seat was empty, and the control board's power light was off. Carlos looked up and muttered, "It's doing it again." "What do you mean?" I asked. He hesitated, then said, "It moves at night, always at the same time." The crane stopped directly above Line 3, right where the accident happened 2 years earlier, where an older worker named Frank Miller was crushed during a test lift. They said he'd ignored a safety lockout, but Carlos swore the crane started on its own. Since then, that section had been left empty. No one worked under it after dark. But that night, we both watched as the hook lowered slowly from the ceiling chains, clinking softly, lower and lower, until the steel tip touched the floor. I grabbed the walkie. "Control, who's moving crane 3? Static." Carlos frowned. "Look at the hook." I did. The steel was glowing faintly, like it was heating from the inside. Then, without warning, the motor screamed a high, piercing shriek that tore through the air like a siren. The entire building vibrated, lights flickered, the ground trembled under our feet. And from somewhere above, I swear I heard a voice shouting over the noise a single word, stretched and distorted. "Move." We ran. Carlos dove behind a press. I dropped my headset and bolted toward the exit. The crane's hook swung wildly, smashing into a pile of steel beams. The echo rang through the building like an explosion. When the sound finally stopped, the air was thick with dust and the smell of burnt oil. The crane was still, completely silent. But the control booth light was on again. We went up to check. No one inside. The chair was still spinning slowly, as if someone had just stood up and left. On the floor near the console was a single glove. It was melted into the metal grate as if it had been fused there. Carlos turned pale. "Frank wore gloves like that," he whispered. Maintenance checked the system the next morning. The controls were fried, melted from the inside out. They said it must have been a power surge. But the footage told a different story. The security camera above Line 3 caught the crane moving, hook lowering, chains tightening. And right before the feed cut, you could see a figure standing in the operator booth, just visible in the reflection of the window. Not Carlos, not me. Someone older, heavier, wearing a torn blue uniform with a name patch on the chest. It said Frank. They shut down Crane 3 for repairs, but the next week, the alarm started again, always at 2:14 a.m. We'd hear the metal shift, the motor grind, and then that same sound, the scream. High-pitched, inhuman, like steel being torn apart from the inside. Sometimes it lasted 10 seconds, sometimes a full minute. No one ever found the source. Months passed. I tried to ignore it, but one night, I had to stay late alone to finish a job. Around 2A. The sound started again, that slow creak of the rails overhead. I froze. The crane moved toward me, its hook swaying slightly. Then it stopped above my workstation. The overhead lights flickered once, and the radio on the table came alive. Static. Then a voice hoarse, muffled, like someone speaking through metal. "You didn't move." I stumbled backward. The hook dropped, suddenly missing me by inches. It smashed through the table, sending sparks flying across the floor. The smell of ozone filled the air. And through the rising smoke, I saw a shape forming above the crane, a human outline made of light and dust, arms raised, face distorted into a silent scream. The motor whined again, and the figure flickered like it was fighting to stay visible. Then the entire system shut down. Darkness. Silence. When the lights came back, the figure was gone. I quit 2 days later, but Carlos stayed. A month later, he called me, his voice shaking. "It's still moving," he said, "even with the power off, and now it's calling names." I told him to leave. He didn't. The following week, the crane came loose from its track during inspection. It fell 30 feet, crushed the operator booth completely. They never found Carlos's body. Only his boots melted into the floor near the wreckage. They rebuilt that part of the factory last year. New cranes, new controls, everything automated. But the workers say the new system still glitches at exactly 2:14 A. Every light on the board flashes red, and if you're standing under the crane, you can hear a faint sound rising above the hum of the motors. Not quite a voice, not quite a scream. Just something trying to move again. If you ever work in a factory long after everyone's gone home, and you hear the ceiling creak above you, don't look up. Because sometimes the machines remember their accidents, and sometimes they want you to join them. Story 6. The locker room that breathed. The locker room was always the quietest part of the factory. No machines, no alarms, just the faint buzz of the lights and the smell of metal, sweat, and detergent. It was the one place you could almost forget the noise outside until the room started breathing. In 2016, I worked third shift at a plastics molding plant in Ohio. We made components for car interiors, dashboards, vent covers, that kind of thing. It was loud, hot, repetitive work. Our locker room sat at the far end of the building, a long corridor lined with dented metal doors and peeling blue paint. Everyone hated it, not because of how it looked, but because of how it felt. Even when the rest of the factory was freezing, that room was always warm, like it had its own heartbeat. The first time I noticed it, I thought it was the pipes. It was 2:30 in the morning. Everyone else was on break. I went in to grab my jacket, and as soon as I opened the door, I heard it. A low, rhythmic inhale, like the sound you make before sighing. I froze. The air felt thicker. My locker door vibrated slightly under my hand, like it was flexing with the sound. Then it exhaled. The light overhead flickered once, and the room went still again. When I told the others, they laughed. "Old pipes," one guy said. "Pressure buildup," said another. But after that, no one liked staying in there alone. A few nights later, Marvin, one of the line operators, went to change his shirt before clocking out. We heard him yell from inside. When we ran in, he was standing in the middle of the room, sweating, his eyes darting between the lockers. "Something's inside," he whispered. We checked. Nothing there, just metal doors and shadows. He swore he'd heard someone whisper his name from the far corner, said it sounded exactly like himself. The next morning, maintenance came to check the ventilation system. They said everything looked normal except for one thing. Behind the vent above the lockers, they found a void. Not an air duct, not a pipe system, just space. An opening about 3 feet wide, stretching deep into the wall. No plans, no construction record of it ever existing. They sealed it with a metal plate, but that didn't stop the breathing. A week later, I was in the locker room again alone, waiting for my ride. The clock said 3:07 a.m. I heard the inhale again, soft, drawn out, like the room itself was pulling in air. Then the sound shifted. It wasn't coming from the walls this time. It was coming from the floor. I looked down. The tile was trembling, dust dancing on the surface. Then, from the far corner, one of the locker doors opened. By itself. I stepped closer, trying to see if it was the airflow, but the door was swinging back and forth, slowly breathing in sync with the sound. I reached out to stop it, and that's when it slammed shut. Hard. The noise echoed through the room, metal screaming against metal. I stumbled back, and all the other lockers started rattling, one by one, like a chain reaction. And beneath it all, the breathing grew louder, heavier, desperate, like something waking up. I ran to the door. It didn't move. The handle was cold, too cold. I banged on it, shouting for help. No one came. The vents were hissing now, and the lights flickered in time with the sound. Then, from behind me, someone whispered, "You forgot to clock out." It was my voice. I turned. Every locker door was open now. Inside each one was darkness, not shadow, but a thick, wet black that looked like it absorbed light. Something moved inside one of them, a hand, pale and trembling, reaching out as if trying to grab hold of air. Then another hand, and another, pushing against the edges of the locker like faces pressing through a curtain. The air grew heavy, my ears popped, and the room exhaled so hard it knocked me off my feet. When I opened my eyes, the lights were normal again, the lockers still, the door unlocked. I stumbled out, gasping. The next day, I came in early to check the security footage. The camera outside the locker room showed me entering, but I never came out. Instead, 2 minutes later, the footage glitched and showed the door opening by itself. Something stepped out. Same height, same uniform, same walk. Me. I quit a week later, but the others stayed, and the breathing never stopped. They say it's gotten worse, that the vents expand and contract now, the walls creaking like ribs under pressure. And sometimes, in the morning, a locker will be open with wet footprints leading from it to the exit. No one claims them. Last month, a new hire disappeared during his break. Security said he must have walked out early, but when they checked his locker, it was warm inside. And on the inside of the door, someone had written, "I'm still here." Factories are supposed to be mechanical, predictable, but that room, it was alive. It breathed in people and exhaled something else. If you ever find yourself alone after hours and you hear the walls inhale, don't wait for them to exhale. Because by the time they do, you might not be the one standing there anymore. Factories don't sleep, they just wait. When the last worker leaves and the lights go dim, the machines keep dreaming, turning, humming, remembering. Every sound in those walls has a memory attached to it. Every dent, every scorch mark, Every echo was made by someone who thought they were alone. The stories you've just heard aren't about haunted buildings. They're about what happens when places built for noise become too quiet. The conveyor that wouldn't stop, the furnace that whispered, the camera that saw too much, the elevator that didn't know where it was going, the crane that screamed, and the locker room that breathed. Each one was a piece of a living thing, a system that learned how to keep working even after everyone was gone. Maybe that's how factories survive so long. Maybe they just start using what's left. If you ever find yourself on a night shift and you feel the air move when it shouldn't, if a machine turns on by itself, or a light flickers when you stop watching, don't look for the cause. Factories have long memories. They remember everyone who's touched them, everyone who's been lost inside them, and sometimes they try to rebuild what they've lost. Thank you for listening to these 6 true factory night shift horror stories. And if you ever walk through a warehouse after hours and the metal starts to hum behind you, don't turn around. Because the factory isn't empty, it's awake, and it's wondering why you're still here.